Coming up on this week's GCN Racing News Show, I'll be looking back at dominant displays from Tadej Pogačar and Lotte Kopecky at the Tour of Flanders and analysing how their races were won. I will also be comparing Pogačar's stats with those of Eddy Merckx, which I think is getting increasingly justifiable. This week in the world of racing, we learned that you do not want to mess with Uttrup Ludwig if you're in a breakaway with her.
Are you kidding me? You're in a breakaway and you're not going.
We also learned that Naomi Roused has some serious bike handling skills. This is her at Tour of Flanders last Wednesday, fighting to stay upright after a rear puncture. We learnt that not all roadside spectators are particularly concerned with watching the actual race. There's a lot going on in this video. One man who single-handedly ruins 100 people's barbecues, and one lady who took a trip to the Portaloo at the crunch point of the men's Tour of Flanders. And finally, we learnt that Tadej Pogačar is on another level. His win yesterday was his 10th so far in 2023 from just 16 days of racing, and I would say the most impressive of them all. I mean, winning Paris-Nice on a route that really suited him is one thing. Winning the Tour of Flanders against the best cobbled classics riders of their generation is quite another. It marks his 4th monument win and means that he's now won 3 of the 5 monuments. The only other rider to have done that before the age of 25 is Eddy Merckx. Although by his 25th birthday, Merckx had already won 7 monuments. So Pogačar is some way behind him, but that said, with Liège-Bastogne-Liège now just 3 weeks away, you wouldn't bet against him adding a 5th monument there. Pogačar is also only the 3rd rider in history to have won both the Tour de France and the Tour of Flanders, the others being Louison Bobet and, yes, you've guessed it, Eddy Merckx. Now, given how different racing is now versus the Merckx era, I think it is justifiable to class Poggy as the new cannibal. Whenever he pins a number on, he wants to win, no matter how small or how big the race is. And over the last few months, more often than not, he has. Add on his last 2 days of racing from 2022, and he's won 12 times from 18 days of racing. Even if you take out the 2 general classification wins this year, that is a strike rate of over 55%, something completely unheard of over that kind of time period in recent times. In men's racing, at least, Lotte Kopecky is now 3 from 5 so far this season, with wins at Omloop, Knokke and De Ronde, plus a close second place to her teammate, of course, at Strade Bianche. She finished her road season last year with a silver medal at the UCI World Championships on the road, ahead of taking 2 gold medals at the Track World Championships. When she is on form and she wants to win, not a lot is going to stop her. Now, given how dominant their respective rides were yesterday, it's quite hard to break down too much when it comes to tactics, but I'm going to head over to the touchscreen now and take a look at how the races were won. Now, under normal circumstances, there's not much worth analysing from the men's Tour of Flanders for the first 120, maybe 130 kilometres. Wide, flat, open road. It's where the early breakaway goes up the road, gets a few minutes, and where everybody else saves energy, eats and drinks for what's to come and the climbs, etc. However, on Sunday, or yesterday, something of significance did happen in the opening few kilometres, and that is that one of the pre-race favourites, who I will mark here, Mathieu van der Poel, was caught napping at the back of the peloton. And a group had been split off the back due to the wind. Now, this was not a case of a team or two going onto the front of the peloton and deliberately trying to split the bunch in the crosswinds. It was simply a case of so many attacks going that the speed was so high, that was what caused the split. Either way, no real excuse for Van der Poel to be hanging around the back because everybody knew the strength of the wind on the day. And although it was unlikely to split, you just never knew whether it might happen. It did, and what it meant was that his teammates here had a big job to do and used a lot of energy up in chasing that peloton back down. This is Søren Kragh Andersen, busy chasing with a snack in his mouth at the same time, multitasking. And a little bit further down, just behind Shane Archibald here, you'll see Sylvain Dillier also having to aid the chase. This was not power and energy that they wanted to be using after having ridden just what? 40 or so kilometres of the race. First big mistake. That said, I don't think that Mathieu van der Poel burned any matches here. He seemed relaxed, he was sat on the wheels, he wasn't contributing to the chase. It was just his teammates that had to use their energy. The next clip is of the now infamous crash of Mathieu Juc going into the peloton. It doesn't get any better the more times you see it. Once you get to the overhead shot, you'll notice that almost half the peloton was either on the ground or at least held up by this crash. Now, Mathieu Juk, to be fair to him, went to Twitter immediately afterwards when he got to his phone to issue an apology. I know that he would have felt absolutely terrible. He was disqualified for this. But the thing with the disqualification is, had he not crashed anybody, had he made exactly the same move and got back onto the road and not affected the race, he wouldn't have been disqualified. And that is where the inconsistency of applying the rules comes from the UCI. Either blanket ban anyone and disqualify them if they're not on the road and on the bike path on the side, or don't disqualify anyone for doing it. That's my opinion on it. You can let me know yours in the comments section down below. The only one of the big three, though, that I could see held up by this is Wout van Aert. He's just here. He did hit the deck. We saw the blood on his knee later on in the race. I don't think it affected him too much, but it's not what you want in the lead into the Oude Kwaremond, which is why the speed was so high at this point in the race. Next up then, I'm going to highlight the Kopecky. Not one of the most important climbs in the race, but something significant happened here. Once again, at the back of the peloton, Mathieu van der Poel, one of the big three. And you see we've also put his tweets that came after the race up here, where he simply puts, "Chapeau at Team DSM." Why? Because Team DSM, at the front of the bunch at this point, have blocked the road, and they are going so slow, it's barely even walking pace. And if you keep your eye just over here, you will spot Biniam Girmay. So slow were they going that he's unable to keep it upright, and he and a number of other riders actually hit the deck. Now, this is part of a plan that used to happen all of the time in this sort of racing, and you'll see over the top that DSM sprints over the top of the Kopecky down the other side in an attempt to put the riders who are at the back out of position in some serious trouble before the rest of the race. I'm quite conflicted in how I think about this, and I know in the past that I've said I hate it when I see that the peloton and riders are blocking the road in the early breakaway attempts to prevent any more riders getting up the road and from racing. This stuff used to happen all of the time in these classics, less so I would say over the last 10 years or so. I'm thinking now, I don't think it should happen anymore. It's a slightly weird way of racing, I think, in the modern era. But like I said, it used to just happen all of the time and nobody really thought anything of it. What you could say is that if you've been strong enough and clever enough to get a whole team in the right position at the right time, then it's your own right to decide the pace of the climbs that you're taking on. Anyway, on to the next part of the race and the first real key point in terms of tactics. So this is a couple of kilometres after the Molenberg. On the Molenberg, we've seen Asgreen raising the pace, trying to get himself in a breakaway. Didn't happen at the time, but at this point, we've got Matteo Trentin, teammate of Pogačar for UAE on the attack. Behind him, Stefan Kung. Behind him, the American Nilsen Powers, who pulled out a fantastic ride, the leader of EF Education Easy Post. Asgreen is about to make his way across. Jumbo-Visma are going to be represented by Nathan van Hooijdonk. And if you keep your eye over here, you will see that both Van der Poel and Pogačar were very well placed, but both looked to the side and neither of them react. Pogačar, of course, wouldn't because Trentin's the man making the move, but for Van der Poel, it meant that the one remaining teammate he had with him had to do an awful lot of work. And just in the background here, you'll see that Trek Segafredo with Mads Pedersen and Lotto Destiny with Florian Vermeersch also managed to get themselves across. We've also got Fred Wright here, so it's an incredibly strong group full of the riders who wanted to try and get a head start on the big three before the major climbs later on in the day. So they did a perfect job. What I will say is that even though Nathan van Hooijdonk was here for Jumbo-Visma, they were playing with fire at this point. Would you bet on Van Hooijdonk being able to take the win when you've got Mads Pedersen, a former podium finisher on this race in the group, when you've got Kasper Asgreen here, who's won this race just a couple of years ago? I wouldn't, but they also didn't really contribute to the chase behind. They left it to UAE at the end of the day. Right, I will move on to the next clip, which is over here. So this is the second time up the Kwaremond. Pogačar here might as well have had a big sign above his head saying, "I'm about to attack." Everybody within the race knew he was going to do it here. Everybody that was watching knew exactly the same thing. And so for that reason, I'm surprised that Van Aert and Van der Poel are so far back. You'd have thought they would have been glued to his back wheel, anticipating the move that he was about to make on this climb, the one that suits him most out of the entire race. What I want to do, though, is highlight Mathieu van der Poel here, because at this point in the race, during commentary, I wasn't sure that he had the legs to be right up there towards the end. Van Aert senses the danger and starts moving up. Oh, it hasn't followed him, so I'll take the magnifying glass off. But you'll see that Van der Poel here the gap begins to open up. 1 bike length, 2, 3. To me, at that point, it looked like he wasn't 100% on the day. We'll see later, though, that he proved me very much wrong. Okay, skip on to the top of the Koppenberg, the steepest climb of the day, just to show you that this is where the big three rode away from the rest. Tom Pidcock unable to keep up with the pace. Same story for Christophe Laporte of Team Jumbo-Visma. They begin catching some of the rides that have been in the day's early breakaway. But the next climb is the Tyenberg, and you'll see here, skip of the gears or something wrong with the drivetrain for Mathieu van der Poel, loses a lot of momentum on what is a very steep cobbled climb. And this is the point where I'm thinking, actually, Van der Poel does have good legs today because, I'll pause it here, although Van Aert and Pogačar weren't going flat out there, they were pressing on. They still had a gap to close to the group of Mads Pedersen and Kasper Asgreen. But this is where we saw that Van Aert was not going to win the Tour of Flanders yesterday. He's been pacing on the Kruisberg out of Ronse, and as he go over the top, Van der Poel decides to attack him. Out of the saddle, a real typical Van der Poel what bomb attack. Now, Van Aert drops his head. He knows that he hasn't got the legs to go with him, but Pogačar does. And so for Van der Poel, he's thinking, great, if I can just keep up with Pogačar on the remaining climbs, I can out-sprint him at the finish, but I've got rid of the person who might out-sprint me if I take him to the finish. We all know what happened next, though, but I'm going to go through it again. What happens next is this. Jumbo-Visma finally make the call to Nathan van Hooijdonk that you have to drop back and help to pace Wout van Aert on before the start of the final time up the Quaremont. The thing was, this was a long way after the Kruisberg where he got dropped. He had to go over the Hotonde, he had to ride in the wind a lot on his own, Wout van Aert. And I was thinking, well, if he's been dropped already, he's going to get dropped again once they hit the Quaremont for the third and final time. Once he gets back there, he's got an 18/19 second gap to close, and he almost gets there, but as expected, Van Aert hasn't got the legs to make his way back up to Van der Poel and Pogačar. This is Pogačar for the second time with a sign above his head saying, I'm about to attack you, Mathieu van der Poel, and Van der Poel unable to go with him. Such was the power that Tadej Pogačar had yesterday at the Tour of Flanders. Now, I noticed this morning that his ride on Strava has been flagged, so I couldn't see all of the details, but last night I had noticed that Pogačar took the KOM for the complete Oude Quaremont, all 2.2 kilometres of it, a few seconds in front of Kasper Asgreen, who did have the KOM before. I'm not sure whether it was on the third ascent or the second ascent in which he took that, but it gives us a sense of just how fast he was climbing on the day. Van der Poel, nothing he can do about it, but at this point, he's still got hope that he can claw his way back on. If not between the Quaremont and the Paterberg, maybe down the descent and on the run into Oudenaarde, because we've got a block headwind. However, that wasn't the case, as we all know. It remained 15 seconds to the foot of the Paterberg, to the top as well. And actually after that, despite the headwind, despite the extra 10 or 12 kilos that Van der Poel has over Pogačar, that gap increased to the finish line in Oudenaarde until Tadej Pogačar sat up and celebrated. He was basically on another level at the Tour of Flanders yesterday. Nothing anybody else could do about it. But if he wasn't in the race, we'd all be saying that this man, Mathieu van der Poel, was on another level, taking a third win at the race and soloing to victory. That's how good Pogačar, though, was on the day. In the women's race, then, the first point of note was that world champion Annemiek van Vleuten of Movistar crashed at a really crucial moment. It actually happens on exactly the same road as the big first crash in the men's race. That is Annemiek van Vleuten on the left-hand side, trying to position herself ahead of the Koppenberg, the steepest and hardest climb of the women's race. But you will see, she gets her wheel caught in a gutter or something on the side of the road. It flings her off, thankfully not straight into the bunch, taking multiple people out, but she did take a couple of other riders down with her. Now, she did get back onto a spare bike and continue on in the race, but with such an important climb coming up so quickly after that incident, she was never going to really have a chance of getting back on terms and in with a chance of winning. Right, we'll move now to the top of the Koppenberg. SD Works have done remarkably well here. Not only do they have Roused and Lotte Kopecky at the front of the race, but just hidden behind Kopecky here is sprinter extraordinaire and World Tour standings leader, Lorena Wiebes. Really come on leaps and bounds on the Hillier Classic so far this season. She's done remarkably well to be that far up. Keep your eye out for the next few seconds of Kopecky, though, because you will see that she loses traction on her rear wheel and is forced to unclip from her pedal. And I don't think this next bit is deliberate, but she pushes Lucinda Brandt here off into the bushes. as I said, I'm sure there was no malice in this at all. It was just as she was getting off her bike and starting to run. But inadvertently, by losing grip on the rear wheel, Lotte Kopecky causes the split of 4 riders off the front of the race at this point, because everybody behind has also been forced to unclip and either walk or run up the remainder of the Koppenberg. The next climb that I'm going to focus on is the Tyenberg. So these 4 riders have gone clear. They don't have a huge gap, just 16 seconds at this point, but we've got 1, 2, 3 riders from SD Works in a group of 4 that also includes Silvio Persico of UAE team ADQ. So a fantastic situation for them to be in. But Kopecky is on a mission on Sunday's race. She presses on up the Tyenberg, clearly on fantastic form, and in doing so, she puts her teammate Vibes into trouble on this climb. And in a few moments' time, you'll see the next cobble descent of the day, which is the Krausberg out of Ronse. And here, looking round, she sees that she's dropped another teammate, Marlon Roused. And so SD Works have gone from a situation where they had 3 riders in a group of 4 to 1 rider in a group of 2, albeit a very confident rider indeed. Right, the next clip shows where I feel like Silvio Persico made a little bit of a mistake. Easy to say in hindsight, but looking back at the race, if I was Persico, I would refuse to give Kopecky any more turns after the Krausberg, given how strong she's already shown that she is. The time gap is up to 33 seconds, so I can understand why she's still working on the front, thinking to herself that I'm going to guarantee myself at least 2nd place here because I'll keep myself away from the chase group behind. That didn't work out in the end. And this place where she's doing this turn is the descent of the Tonberg. And as you can see, Kopecky barely having to pedal behind her. She's getting a real rest ahead of the Quaremont and Paterberg double punch to come. And that's where we'll move on to next. I think it's over on this side. The Outer Quaremont. The women only take it on 1 time, same with the Paterberg. No attack here from Kopecky, but again, just on a mission, fantastic form. The power that she puts through the pedals is enough to see the lights go out for Persico behind. And to make matters even worse for the Italian, just here you'll see her wheel slips and she scrubs off a whole load of speed. I don't think she would have come close to Kopecky again, but she certainly was never going to after the rear wheel slipped on the Quaremont climb. At the top, Kopecky already had a significant advantage, and it only increased really over the Paterberg and then into the finish line in Oudenaarde. 2 from 2 at the Tour of Flanders from Kopecky, and it would take a brave person to bet against her winning Roubaix on Saturday. Just before we finish with the Tours of Flanders, a few injury updates after those horrific crashes in the men's race. Ben Turner had yet more bad luck, fracturing his arm in the first major pile-up, whilst Tim Wellens will have to sit out the rest of the classics with a broken collarbone. Or actually really a shattered collarbone. He tweeted, say it's in 4 pieces. Ahmed again suffered a fractured elbow in that second high-speed crash. Teammate Biniam Girmay surprisingly had no fractures, but did have a concussion, as did Taco van der Hoorn. A very bad day for Intermarché Circus Wanty. You've got to feel for them. Davide Ballerini had a nasty cut above his eye after crashing in sight of the finish line. And I'm sure there are a lot of other bruised riders out there today. The 96 finishers is the lowest number since 2010. We wish all the people that were injured a speedy recovery. Right, on now to what we've got coming up for you on GCN Plus this week. And the good news is that we have at least 1 race for you every single day. By the time you watch this racing news show, stage 1 of the Tour of the Basque Country will likely be done and dusted. And it's our next opportunity to watch Tour de France champion Jonas Vingegaard back in action. Dane's going to be up against the likes of Gaudu, Mas, Izagirre, Higuita, Martinez, Carapaz, Landa, Bilbao and Soler, amongst many other GC favourites over the next 6 days. A notoriously tough 6 days, and as such, there are very few sprinters there on the start line. Coverage is going to be available in all GCN Plus territories, so all subscribers will be able to tune in live or on demand as you wish. The cobbles then continue on Wednesday with the men's and women's Scheldeprijs races, so another taste of cobblestones in what is generally a sprinter's race. And then at the weekend, we're in hell. The 3rd edition of the women's Paris-Roubaix avec Zwift comes on Saturday, the 120th edition of the men's on Sunday. Our full preview of those races will be out for you later on this week on GCN Racing. But in the men's, Van Aert and Van der Poel will start as the big favourites, with everybody else looking to get ahead of them, whilst Kopecky will be looking to break the SD Works duck in the women's. A few would bet against her doing exactly that, given her current form and determinations. Territory restrictions do apply to both Scheldeprijs and to Paris-Roubaix, so please check if they are available where you are. Now, as well as the unmissable action from Roubaix this weekend, we also have the first round of the all-new National Cycling League from Miami Beach on Saturday. GCN Plus is the exclusive worldwide broadcast partner of the NCL, a brand new format for crit racing over in the US, consisting in 2023 of 4 races in different locations, they being Miami, Atlanta, Denver and Washington. Each venue will be providing a home team evenly split between male and female riders, and we can expect fireworks as the NCL has the largest prize pot ever seen in criterium racing. I'm really looking forward to seeing how that brand new format works out, so I'll be tuning in on Saturday for that. Meanwhile, our documentary this week is all about Sean the King Kelly. I went to visit him over in Ireland earlier on this year to talk to him about his career and his life, as well as taking on some clay pigeon shooting. That one will be released for all GCN Plus subscribers from tomorrow, and I'd love to hear what you think about it. Incredible, though, to think that Sean Kelly has won the Tour of the Basque Country and Paris-Roubaix in the same year, twice. So a brutal 6-day race in the mountains and a monument with just 1 day of rest in between, where presumably he was travelling up to France. Tadej Pogačar, eat your heart out. Talking of the Hell of the North, or L'Enfer du Nord, this very t-shirt is available now for purchase over at shop.globalcyclingnetwork.com. So if you like the look of it and you want to get your hands on one, just head over to our website there. In other races, Jumbo-Visma's men's team took their 5th Cobble Classic win of the season on Wednesday at Tour of Flanders. Christophe Laporte and Tish Benoit both made the winning move in the race, and when the Frenchman made his move in the closing stages, nobody could get back on terms. MVP that day, though, was Oya Lascano of Movistar. So the Basque rider had been in the early breakaway all day, only Alexander Kristoff for company towards the end of the race, and then once caught, still had the energy left to attack again and finish second in the race. Cycling's new cult hero right there, I think. In the women's, it was yet another win for SD Works, with Demi Vollering soloing to victory, 38 seconds ahead of Chiara Consonni, who edged out Marianne Vos in the sprint for second place. Caden Groves and Mika Bredevold took wins at the Walter Limburg Classic on Saturday for Alpecin de Koning and SD Works respectively. The same day, in fact, that Jon Izagirre took his second career win at the Grand Prix Miguel Indurain. 1 day earlier than that, Uno X's Frédéric Vesnes took his first ever pro win at the Route Adelaide de Vitré in France, and apologies for the mispronunciation on that. Now, in other unfortunate news, Sweet Spot announced last week that the Women's Tour will not take place in 2023, the latest blow to racing in Britain. Increase in costs has left them at a shortfall, and crowdfunding, unfortunately, did not raise enough money to make the race viable financially this year. A real shame, I've got to say. Safe to say that the Women's Tour was a trailblazer for women's cycling in general, and there were always huge crowds on the roadside to support the riders. Here's hoping it is back on the calendar in 2024. Finally, I'll give you a quick update on the current win league in World Tour teams. Jumbo-Visma have already racked up 20 wins on the men's side in 2023 and are at the top of the table. Soudal Quickstep not far behind them on 18, whilst UAE are on 17. 10 of those, though, of course, coming from Pogačar himself. The only other teams who have taken more than 10 wins so far this year are EF Education Easy Post, who sit on 13. Astana and Bora remain at the bottom with 1 win apiece. On the women's side, you can probably guess which team leads the table. Yes, SD Works are on 9, putting them 2 ahead of Trek Segafredo on 7. Jumbo-Visma, Uno X, Fenix de Koning, Liv Racing and Israel Premier Tech Roland are the 5 teams yet to get themselves off the mark. Although it should be pointed out there are far fewer days of racing on the women's calendar and therefore far fewer opportunities to take wins. Right, that is all for this week's GCN Racing News Show. Do not forget to check out our big preview for Paris-Roubaix in the next couple of days. I will see you then, but bid you a fond farewell for now.